And I guess while we are waiting, did folks bring, just so I kind of know what I'm working with, did folks bring like the start of a resume and a job posting?
Yes, I brought my old resume. I haven't updated my resume.
That's okay. That's totally fine. Pretty much like the majority of this, you'll likely end up scrapping a lot of that because we'll kind of go piece by piece. The idea is to have sort of like a master list of like, here are all the things that I might put in a resume, and then be able to kind of curtail it to whatever job posting you're posting. So, well, it's like 4 after. I figure people will probably pop in as they but and normally I would do like when we usually go over this, it's in like a classroom with a partner, but because this is all like folks who don't necessarily know each other and resumes can be really personal, I'm gonna have everybody work kind of independently, just in like this group setting, and you just ask me questions as they come up. So but anyway, thank you for coming here. Good morning. I am Rachel Busser. I'm the Director of Student Services for Epicodus. We're a code school that is both online and then in Portland and Seattle. I have been with Epicodus for a little over 6 years, and the majority of my job has been leading a team that helps folks who are transitioning into tech find their first job. So we're, I guess, like just kind of like fair warning as we go through the material, if you haven't looked at the curriculum already, like a lot of the examples are very like code school student based, so we'll kind of use that as like a jumping off point and then talk about what that might look like if you know, for other kind of lived experiences. But I guess actually before hopping in, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you all in terms of like what your background is and you know, how long you've been in tech, that sort of thing.
I get started. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. Yeah, I have. So I'm Nani, and I work in DC. I run farmers markets, but I've been doing some coding for a long time. I would say the first time I ever got paid for coding is when my sister, when I was 19, got me arrested because she wanted to get some photographs of a abandoned hospital for some high school project she was doing. So we went to the hospital, was taking photos for her, and then she had parked on the grounds of the abandoned hospital, which I told her not to do. Anyway, she got caught by the police, and then she outed me for some reason, and so we got arrested. So we had to do 24 hours of community service, and so my friend, who was doing a summer project where they were inputting 15,000 line Excel spreadsheet by hand into this donor database at this nonprofit. And so for my community service, they were like, hey, you can come do some data entry for us for 24 hours. And I was like, inputting 15,000 lines of Excel in a donor database by hand seems crazy. And so anyway, I wrote a little Perl script that did it for us, but then they paid me $100, but my friend and I were out of a job for the summer. So not great, but that's how I first got into coding, and I've been sort of doing it on and off just to save myself time ever since. And now I've built a Rails website, and like 300 companies are using it. It's like a farmers market management thing, but that's it so far.
Super cool. I love it. I think one of my favorite things about like running workshops like these and about working with our students is people come from like such a wide variety of backgrounds, and that's like something I really love about the accessibility of tech as an industry to get into. So and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but does anybody else want to share?
I can go. So yeah, I work as a software engineer for West Virginia University currently. I got into it because I was a designer and I got tired of the print world, which was hustle and bustle of like loading paper, printing, designing, installing vehicle wraps. It was just not for me. So I had been making websites for a while before that and decided to go to SCAD to do interactive design and game development. And then really from there, the code aspect just kind of fell on me. So I got a job doing PHP development. That morphed into JavaScript, which morphed into Ruby and Rails. And so, yeah.
Well, very cool. I don't want to leave anybody out. Does anybody else want to share before we move on?
I'd be happy to. I don't know if you can hear me. My mic
Yeah.
was, you can? Okay, cool.
Yep, you're good.
My name is Brian. I started coding when I was in high school, programming games on the TI-83 plus calculator, making quick $5 here, wherever I can, just making games. And I really loved it. Went to school for programming, went to Northern Illinois University for a year, studying computer science. And then I went to a technical school called Westwood College, which has since been shut down by the Attorney General. That's a long story, but whatever. Needless to say, because of their alleged illegal activities, I didn't get my degree from there, but I did study video game development, and that kind of pushed me towards that industry. I went down a completely different path. I ended up opening up my own business. I opened up a brewery with a friend of mine who was also a programmer from that school, and then transitioned into working in a bar where the structure of documents there was infuriating me being a manager. So I took it upon myself to write my own. So within the Google script framework using JavaScript, I created a scheduling app, an inventory management app, and a bunch of other things to kind of help the business just pro bono on my own. And that really got me motivated again to start programming and doing this. So then I had devoted the past year to re-educating myself, learning Ruby on Rails, developing websites and apps and stuff like that. And here I am.
Very cool. Awesome. Anybody else? I think we've finally reached the point. Okay, great.
Oh, hi. I think I missed the intro prompt, but it sounds like we're sharing names and background a little bit.
Yep, basically, I'm just trying to get a sense for like what your experience with coding is and like what you were doing before.
Cool.
I'm so sorry.
So sweet. And apologies for my funny video. I have a strange webcam placement. But my name's Caroline. Nice to meet everyone. I was excited by Brian's story because I'm working in a brewery right now while I learn to code. And I'm intrigued by some of the use cases you mentioned. But I am transitioning to tech from urban planning. I've worked in planning for the last 10 years or so, and would like to make sort of a shift away and focus my career more technically. So I'm a scholar in the program at the conference now, and just looking to kind of gain some tips for repositioning some of those skills for a new industry.
Very cool. I'm so sorry. I don't know what his deal is. But awesome. Okay, so I guess like last call, is there anybody else? I don't want to like accidentally skip anyone.
I can go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I come from an IT background. I did IT desktop support and was an IT manager for quite a few years. At one point in the middle of my IT career, I decided that I was going to switch to accounting. And so I started working for a company in their accounting department and found that they were doing a whole bunch of stuff manually. They were all doing it in Excel spreadsheets. And they were tracking like return checks and stuff like that. And they had a policy on their return checks that, if the customer had, I think it was 2 or 3 return checks, they had to be on cash for 6 months. And there was no way to track it. It was all in an Excel spreadsheet. So I started taking a lot of my tasks and I created Microsoft Access databases and began creating databases with forms to basically automate all my tasks. And it started with one database for one thing, and another database for another. And next, one of my coworkers, I did one for her tasks, and saved her 3 hours of work. And so at that point, I ended up then switching my degree that I was working on to from accounting to accounting information systems. But then when I graduated with that, it was like, I don't want to do this. So I went back to IT for a little while, but at that point I suddenly realized, hey, I should have done CS or gone into programming. So I started with my spare time, started studying programming. Then I went to a boot camp in 2014, and it was a absolute disaster because my mindset and everything that was going on at the time, it just was not a good fit for me, and I probably should have waited. And so things were kind of start and stop for a couple of years, and then in 2019, I picked back up on my studies, and I was originally focusing on JavaScript, and but then recently a friend did a small 4-week online boot camp for Ruby on Rails. And so I picked it back up again because that's what we studied in the boot camp in 2014. And so we picked it up again, and I was like, wow, this totally makes sense, and I'm loving it. So I'm currently unemployed, and so I'm just kind of in the position of getting ready to start trying to put everything together and get out there to apply for jobs.
Awesome. Well, I hope that this helps. So yeah, I guess before we jump into the curriculum itself, I think like a couple of things about getting into tech as an industry. One of the things that I feel like is really unique about tech versus a lot of other industries is that there is a lot more opportunity to pivot in ways that you might not be able to otherwise. Like, for instance, if you want to go be an accountant, you pretty much have to have a degree in that. Or if you want to go like, a lot of other jobs, you have to have the very like specific schooling. With tech, I think not that there are not definitely companies where that is mandatory, but a lot of times it's less about like where you picked up your education or what credentials you have, and more about being able to show what you can do. And so I think like there tends to be a little bit of a unique opportunity there. The trade-off, of course, Dave, as you mentioned in Discord, is the hiring system can be a little bit difficult because there are so many oftentimes like tests and things to move along in the interview process. So there's definitely a little bit of like give and take there. Before we jump into getting to work on resumes, does anybody have any questions? Cool. Awesome. And I'm sorry, I'm very new to Zoom. We usually use Google Meet at work. So I'm gonna figure this out. And I mentioned before, but I think it was before most people were here yet. So normally this is something where in the classroom, we have people pair up, but because this is all folks who have not been like working closely together for months, and resumes and things like that can be a little bit personal, I'm gonna have everybody work kind of independently, but in this main room so that I'm available to answer questions as they come up and things like that. So, cool. So with that being said, let me, there's so many more options. Okay, can everybody see the curriculum piece all right? Cool. And we're gonna stick to this like just very loosely. It's more meant to be kind of a jumping off point. This is not really like a a slide presentation apt kind of talk, because so much of this is like doing actual kind of work on your resume and cover letter. But kind of basically, as sort of a broad overview, yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this is you want to start with a job description when you're doing your actual cover letter and resume. But I kind of like backing up a step. The easiest way to like make your job search a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more a little bit like of a less stressful experience when you're trying to fill out a number of jobs is to have sort of like a master like document that has like, these are the things that I might put in a resume, or these are the things that I might put in a cover letter. And so we're gonna like kind of start with what you do specifically, and then we're gonna back up to that. So basically, like the curriculum is saying, the best place to start, oops, sorry, that is not what I wanted to do. Best place to start is with the job description itself. And you're gonna look at a few different things as you're going through. So like in this particular job description, generally they're going to start out with a little bit about the company and a little bit about the job that they want people to do, and then they move into the requirements piece. And before like we look at the specific example, generally speaking, I think one of the places that junior developers tend to get the most hung up is feeling like you have to qualify for everything that is on that list. I promise you do not have to qualify for everything that's on that list. It's a wish list. And so generally speaking, like if you hit like 60% of those, it's worth at least putting in an application. Give them the opportunity to say yes. But yeah, like imposter syndrome is such a big thing for junior developers. And like if you don't apply for a job, you will never get it. But if you apply for a job, even if you feel like it's a little bit outside your comfort zone, or a little bit, or they're asking for things that you don't feel super confident about, as long as you've got at least like, over half of that list, you're in a better place than a lot of the applicants that they're getting. So that's kind of just sort of like a thing to note as you go through. But so for instance, like this particular one, they're asking for, experience with Linux. They're asking for, this is an example from, we used to work with them when we taught PHP once upon a time. So a lot of this is talking about PHP and Drupal. So you'll have that sort of beginning part that's got like the job requirements from a technical standpoint. But the other piece, and this is where it can be really, really useful to have some background in something else, is the skills and attributes, please. Because, sometimes they, so for instance, like I work a lot with New Relic here, and they hire a lot of like support engineers. They love to hire people who have some kind of customer service background. So I've worked with folks who have been like, been in retail, or who have been bartenders, or who have been like all of these other things that have then gone to go do that, and used it as sort of a springboard to get into their first developer job. So it's a really good thing as you're going into deciding what's going to go on your resume to think not just about what you can do technically, but what other like skills do you bring to the table, or what qualities do you have do you have great time management? Do you have, really good people skills, things like that. So like, don't discount any of that as you're going in. And so, yeah, so basically what this is going through here is kind of like distilling down those skills and requirements to what do you want to think about as you're putting your resume together. So for instance, like this one, we kind of broke it down to just like keywords. And so some of those are going to be, things from the technical requirements. And then also you want to kind of take a look through like, okay, well, what things are they asking for from a soft skills perspective? And oftentimes the easiest thing to do is to just like jot all of those things down. So kind of like what we did here. as you, like, once you've done that, and we're gonna, like, for the most part, kind of skip over a lot of this piece here so that we can kind of go into the prep work that you do before you create a specific resume. But a lot of this is you want to kind of compare your own experiences to what the things that they're asking for. So what hard skills do you have? What soft skills do you have? What, what other things do you bring to the table that you don't want a hiring manager to, like, leave your resume and cover letter without knowing about you? Or what, like, unique experiences do you have that set you apart? And then it sounds like most of you also have done work independently on projects. Like, there is so much value in that too, because it shows that you are, especially if it's stuff that you did outside of, like, a work or school environment, because it shows that you have, like, a passion for coding, but it also shows that, like, you have the drive and ambition to take a concept all the way through to execution, which is a really, really, really useful one. So yeah, so, like, for right here, we have kind of like a generic sort of example of, somebody who their background was in tech support and as a barista. And, like, a lot of the specifics here are not super important. Because, like, so much of this is not, is more like kind of a guideline than specific material we're going through. I'm going to drop the link just in the Discord channel so that people can follow along, but we're not going to, like, read through it word for word or anything like that. But yeah, so you kind of want to start with, like, what do you have? And then think about, like, okay, what pieces do you not have? If somebody is asking for a bunch of technologies that you don't know, and, like, oh, I have all the soft skills, but I don't have any of the technical skills, that might be a case where, like, it's not as value add to you to apply to that particular job. And so, like, that's kind of like the exception to the, if you meet like 60%, then you can kind of apply. But the other thing is to kind of think about, like, okay, what pieces are missing? Is this something where I'm invested enough in this job to, like, go try to pick those things up? Are they things that I could pick up quickly? Because, sometimes they're asking for, like, a specific tool that you could learn over the weekend or something like that. Sometimes they're asking for, like, something very in-depth that it takes a while. And those are very different things to try to, like, make up as you go through your job search. So kind of now, having gone through that, we're gonna back up to, like, creating sort of a master resume. So let me bring up the resume page. We'll come back to the cover letter. And so this is kind of just, like, a broad example. I would not recommend this from a formatting standpoint, but it's there as, like, these are kind of the things that you want to think about putting on your resume. So before you start making your list of, like, what things you want to put on your resume specifically, it's good to have kind of like a broad idea of, like, what topics do you want to make sure are on there. I am so sorry. My microphone is really sensitive too, so it's like a perfect storm of stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of, like, kind of back and forth about whether it makes sense to have, like, that sort of introductory piece. Generally speaking, my suggestion is, if you are just starting out and you don't have, like, some kind of reputation that speaks for itself, it's really useful to have just something very short and to the point about, kind of giving them, like, a preview before they jump into your qualifications, because that's going to be, like, your first chance to make an impression on them. Like, this is why you should care, even though I'm a junior developer, or, like, even though I'm just starting out. And so you can talk about, so for instance, like, if we were applying to that support role at New Relic, this particular beginning would be a really good start because it says right up front, it talks about that like customer service piece that you're coming from. This is one of those things that is likely to look different on a lot of different applications that you fill out, depending on what role that you're trying to apply for, and depending on what pieces of your background you're trying to like really showcase. But the things that you're going to want to like start kind of making a list of are, what projects do you have that you feel like represent who you are as a developer? If you you know, have a project you're particularly proud of, especially if you have like a GitHub repository for it that you can share, or if you have a live project that you can link them to, like that is also ideal. It's a little bit, so sometimes the person who is doing hiring is very technical and they will benefit more from having your GitHub repository. Sometimes they are not technical and having that like live demonstration is going to be the better way to go. You can definitely, if you've got both, put both. But yeah, so you kind of want to start by, and we'll kind of just take this section by section. So I guess like first thing, maybe start by making a quick list of what projects that you feel like might be something that you would want to show to a potential employer. And the things that you want are basically like the name of it, what tools and technologies did you use, what is the concept behind it, like what is it supposed to do, and then if it's applicable, like was it for something in particular, you know, were you trying to solve a real world problem, was it something that you were commissioned to do, like that sort of thing. So we'll kind of pause there really quick so that y'all can have just a couple of minutes to put that piece together, and then we'll move on to the next section. And I'm gonna see if I can find some good way to. I guess if you want to just like come off mute real quick and let me know when you're at a good stopping point, or if you have any questions. I feel like this is kind of a small enough group that we probably don't need like raised hands or anything. So.
So we're working on the that top section there. What?
Oh, basically like just the projects piece, like think of maybe like 2 or 3 projects that if you have them, and if you don't, that's totally okay.
Oh, okay.
But basically just, you know, what project is it? Do you have links to the GitHub or to the live project? And what like kind of quick summary can you give about the technologies that you used? What was it supposed to do? That sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Perfect. And okay, I am finally figuring out Zoom. I have not actually run a meeting before, so I'm kind of still learning the controls a little bit. There's a raise hand function. So I guess if you want to just, it might be a little bit less disruptive. Just go ahead and like raise your hand when you're done. And I want to make sure folks have time to do everything, but I also don't want to like leave you all sitting in silence for forever. So
Hi, Rachel,
Hi.
can you hear me?
I can.
Betty is only having projects that I cannot put the source code.
Oh, that's okay. If you, it's one of those things where like, it's definitely a very positive thing to have, but even if you can just give like a description of a project that you'd be comfortable talking about in an interview, that is also okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I think just to make sure that we're able to get through all of this, we'll just give it another maybe minute or two, and we're going to move on to the next piece. If you don't feel like you have a full list, that is totally okay. It is definitely something that you kind of like come back to. Resumes in general tend to be kind of like a living document. So.
Rachel, you are muted. If you're speaking, we not listen.
Yep, I am so sorry. Thank you. I'm in the interest of making sure we're able to get through everything. I'm going to move us to the next section. If you are still working on the projects piece, that's totally fine. You can keep working on that or kind of come back to it also. So I'm gonna. There we go. Okay. So the next piece is education. That we're not necessarily going to go through a whole lot in the context of this workshop because it's fairly straightforward. If you have code school experience, if you have college experience, like that's great. Definitely put that down. Basically, kind of the way that you want to approach that is, if you went to school for computer science specifically, or if you went to a code school, like talk about what tools and technologies that you learned, like what are the big things that you really want to like showcase to an employer. If you went to school for something else, that's also great. Think about what pieces of your education, regardless of where you got it, or whether it's formal or things that you have like pursued on your own. Just kind of think about like what's transferable. There's a lot of other degrees where like there's still pieces where like you took a class on this or that can definitely carry over and be valuable in the tech industry as well. So when you go through and do like your actual resume, that's definitely kind of a piece that you want to talk about. But the thing that I think is going to probably be the biggest piece of what we work on is the experience piece. Because this is where it becomes like a valuable thing to be coming from another industry or have some kind of like work experience. So leaving aside the job posting that you brought or the example one, where you want to kind of start is creating a master list of experiences. And so that might be a couple of different things. It might be jobs that you worked. It might be volunteer experience. It might be like anything like that. I mean, so I had a student who leveraged, she ran a server dedicated to like an online game, and like was able to kind of leverage that quite a bit. And it played fairly heavily into like her getting her first job, because she had no other work experience, and she was still able to kind of like show some value in that. So don't discount the things that you did before, even if it doesn't like immediately look like, oh, this is like an exact carryover. So generally what you're going to want to do is kind of start out by like listing off each of those experiences that you might be able to talk about. And then underneath each one, think about, you know, kind of like a typical resume. What pieces do you specifically want to showcase for each of those? And this is a thing I think where people tend to get hung up quite a bit, because it's not, I think people's like knee-jerk response to that is to do like, this is a laundry list of the things that I did. That's not actually where the value is in showing your experience on a resume. What companies are looking for is like, how were you successful in this role? So think about what skills you developed. Think about what, you know, what were the expectations in the role, and then how did you measure up to that? So for instance, like if I were talking about like a sales role, I wouldn't say that I sold cell phones or whatever. I would say I hit my sales goal 90% of the time, or like something like that. So think about things kind of quantifiably. And it's worth talking about, you know, broadly speaking, things that showcase like what soft skills do you bring to the table, or like what big learning experiences did you have in this role? Because even if it's like flipping burgers, there is still something that you can bring with you from that. So we'll take about 10 minutes, I think, to kind of go through the experience piece. And it doesn't have to be a full comprehensive list. I just want to make sure that you've got something kind of to start from. And much like the project piece, like this is going to be sort of a living document. So as you build up other experiences, like add those, absolutely. If you do volunteer work, or if you do other projects or things, especially, those can be things that are really valuable to add that people often overlook. So I'm going to be available to answer questions if you want thoughts on like how to word a particular like detail on the experience that you're going over. I am here, but otherwise we'll take probably the next like until on the hour, I think, to go over this next piece. And then we'll talk about like translating all of this into a specific resume for the job that you brought with you. I guess while folks are looking on this, does anybody have any questions about this or about anything more broadly related to the workshop?
Question that I have is on my old resume. I haven't updated it in a long time, so that's one thing that I'm working on. I had on all of my experience, I had like a small paragraph before followed by bullet points. And so I noticed these ones here are just like a couple bullet points.
Yeah, so I generally recommend, I couldn't really speak to other industries, but in tech, definitely, I would recommend like staying away from that paragraph first.
Okay.
Because like everything that you're trying to showcase should come through in those bullet points. But more importantly, oftentimes hiring managers are looking through a whole bunch of resumes. And so you want it to be like super, super, super readable. If you have like a narrative paragraph, you have a lot less agency over what message they take away because they may or may not read that whole thing.
Okay.
But if you have it in bullet points, it becomes very clear, like, I am trying to show you XYZ thing about this job. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just kind of stick with a couple of key accomplishments.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Cool. And in this like master list, like you can have as many as you want. But I guess like be prepared when you're making a resume for a specific job posting, unless you have a ton of relevant experience. And generally speaking, because you're bringing stuff from other industries, that's not going to be the case. You really want to like try as hard as you can to distill it down to one page, because that gives you the best opportunity to make sure that like someone will actually read your resume.
So I had a question about like frequent title changes. Like I'm trying to talk about my job, but it was like director of markets and programs, and then deputy director, and just on and on. And they all kind of happened at different points in time. And
Sure. Yeah, so there's two ways you might approach that, and it sort of depends. Were those title changes like differing roles and responsibilities within the same company, or were they like different names for the same thing?
they almost feel like different names for the same thing eventually, the wearing lots of hats, but certainly we did merge, and then my title changed to merger, but it's kind of the same responsibility, but now for twice as many people and things.
So that is totally worth talking about, though, because leading. So, for instance, like my background before all of this was in business management. Managing a team of 10 people versus managing a team of 40 people is like wildly different. Not just like, even though the principles are the same and the basic duties are the same, like that experience and kind of what you bring with you is a little bit different. So what I would say is there's a couple of ways that you can structure it. You could group like if you have a series of roles where your responsibilities and scope were like very, very similar, you could group those all kind of under one role and just like kind of make a mental note to if they were to offer you a job and do a background check to kind of explain that a little bit, just so that there's no confusion. If you have roles where you like grew in responsibility, I would definitely say to list those separately, because you want to be able to show, if you can show like growth within a company, that tells employers that like you're interested in that sort of like continuous improvement, which is a really valuable thing, even if it's in a totally different industry.
Right, that makes sense. And then, yeah, I don't know how to say or how to list, or even if I should list roles where I was the acting position. So I was the acting executive director for a while we were overseeing this merger, kind of like an acquisition, actually, this other company. I was the acting executive director at the time. And then we acquired this other company, but they had an executive director, so they became the executive director, and I stepped back to deputy director. So I don't trying to figure out how to.
You could. Oh, that's a good question. So this is probably one of those rare instances where if you want to talk about those things separately, it does make sense to make a little note on there that this was not like a demotion, that this was like a merger.
Right.
Or you can also like leave out. So did you say it was acting
Executive director, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You could also, you don't even necessarily have to talk about it like that. You can specify that like this was a temporary position while you were helping oversee this aspect of the merger. And like frame it as the like kind of growth opportunity that it was. Because like that's definitely also even though the title that you had like afterwards maybe doesn't align specifically, being able to talk about like you had a team that like your management like trusted you to do this thing, and like you were clearly successful at doing it because like you stayed with the company afterwards. So yeah, so there's not necessarily like a this is probably like the most frustrating thing about writing resumes and cover letters, is that for a lot of these things, there's not like one right answer. It becomes more a matter of like, think about all the things that you might say, and then look at the job posting, do a little research on the company, and like, okay, well, what do I feel like is the most powerful narrative in this particular case?
Okay.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next part? Cool. Awesome. Okay. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but does anybody feel comfortable sharing the job posting that they brought with them and the like master list that they've been putting together? And if not, that's totally okay. It's just sometimes easier to work with like a real example that we can kind of talk about in real time, versus like, this is what somebody might put. And there's also stuff in the curriculum itself, so it's not a big deal if not. All right, we will go through the this piece. Cool. Okay, so this next part kind of talks about using that master list that we just made. So for instance, talking about that job that we were looking at the very beginning, the one for Acquia, we kind of go through, this is the like fake master list for this particular student that talks about like kind of like what we were talking about, or what I mentioned in the education piece, just like touching on all of the things that you might want to express to a company. And then the easiest thing is to kind of just like migrate whatever is relevant to the job posting. So, you know, it was asking about things like SQL databases. It was asking about using Git and GitHub. It was asking about, you know, a variety of like things like that, and PHP. And so this is, so what was done here was basically just kind of like crossing out which pieces did we decide to use from our master list. And there's two places where you might use that. We're mostly just going to talk about resume today. We'll touch real briefly on cover letters, but yeah, so some of it will also go in your cover letter. If there are things that you can talk about in a quantifiable way in bullet points, those are the things that you want to put on your resume. If it's something where you feel like you need to flesh out the narrative a little bit more to express like, this is why this is true and this is why it matters, or like why it should matter to you, those are things that are more appropriate to a cover letter. And then also like, this is kind of how you do that in a non-developer role. Like, so for instance, what was done here was like talking about, okay, what are the things that I like can show in terms of like my own skills that were like on display as a barista at this coffee house. And then for like each of those qualities, what examples can you give? Because you might find, you know, for a lot of things, there's more than one example that might be relevant. And then you kind of just look at the job posting and see like, okay, well, what fits this particular scenario? So the next, I guess actually, does everybody have a like starter resume that they brought with them? Cool. If not, and you don't want to think too much about like, this is not the structure that I would recommend ultimately. But if you're looking for something quick that you can work with, if you go into like Google Docs, there's a resume template that gives you kind of a good starting point for like organizing all of these pieces. So if you don't, if you're somebody who is not on camera and doesn't necessarily have one, that's a good place to start. So what you're going to want to do next is take your job posting that you brought, read through it, and just like jot down real quick, or just like make notes somewhere of what are the like skills, both like technical and non-technical, that they're looking for. And then which ones of those are things that like apply to me. And then you kind of decide from there, okay, like what things can I talk about that will showcase that. And I don't expect that you'll have like a fully fleshed out resume in the next 20 minutes, but you'll have like a good start for that. The main thing really is you really want to have that sort of master resume. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see folks make when they are job searching is sending the same resume for every job that they apply to. That is a very easy thing to do. It is also a really easy way to like not make any progress. And the reason for that is it is very clear to hiring managers, generally speaking, if you have a resume or if you have a cover letter that is like a template that you send out. Because like, if you're talking about skills that are not at all relevant to the things that they asked for, whether that's in your resume or whether that's in your cover letter, like it becomes very obvious, like at that point, like, oh, this is just the thing that they send to everyone. And while yes, it takes a few extra minutes to like put all of this in a more like specialized package for this one particular company, the payoff tends to be a lot more worth it. So yeah, so I guess like the next little bit, we'll take like 5 or 10 minutes to go over kind of like translating the master list that you put together into the like a resume for the specific job that you're trying to apply for. And then kind of while y'all are working on that, I would love to kind of open it up at this point to answer any questions about things like, were there things that you came here hoping to learn more about that I have not touched on yet? The great thing about this kind of workshop is it's very open-ended, and I want to make sure that people leave here today with what they were hoping to take away.
I just had a real quick question about the website with all of this presentation information.
Yeah.
How long is that gonna is that gonna be around, or is that just for this presentation, or?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing about Epicodus is we're really, really focused on making tech an accessible career pathway. And that has meant a couple of things. It means like for our students, we try to keep our tuition really low. And we put a lot of our efforts into the like career services side of things to help folks who, maybe college wasn't in the cards for them, or for whatever reason, like they have extra hurdles to getting into the industry. But the other piece is all of our curriculum is available online for free. Yeah, so if you want to just note down, like learnhowtoprogram.com is like the broader thing, and then there's like a button that has tracks. There's a piece that's specific to job searching, but there's also, so we teach our current 2 tracks. They both start with like an intro thing, and then JavaScript, and then they either do Ruby and Rails, or they do C# and .NET, and then they cycle back and do React. So like if there's anything in there that you ever like feel like you could use some extra brushing up on, like you are welcome to access all of that at any point. I'm happy to look at people's, I don't want to make anybody like show anything publicly. So I'm going to leave my email address in the Discord channel. If you would like me to look at your resume and or cover letter when it's done, I am absolutely always happy to do that. So.
Hey, Rachel, can you hear me? You are muted.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself, but I guess not.
I had another question.
Sure.
If I'm applying for a job in another country, there are specific things that I need put on my resume because of the
Okay.
fact.
That's a good question. I think like that one's a little tougher. It depends like on like what the work requirements are in that particular country. If they are like, and it depends on if it's like remote or otherwise, like generally speaking, you are going to like, there's a couple of extra things that we didn't talk about here because there's not really anything to like, there's not really a project around them. But generally speaking, you're going to want to put, if you are applying for a job like in the same country where you live, you'll want to put like your phone number, your email, and generally like your LinkedIn. If you're applying internationally, I would say probably also put your location and make use of that like starter spot to like let them know anything relevant, whether that is like whether that's visa status or whether that's like work that you like plan to work remotely or anything like that, if it's relevant. If they don't ask for it, if you put your LinkedIn, like it will generally tell them where you're located and they can ask you if they have questions. So that tends to be like a more like sort of passive way to approach it if they don't specifically ask for any information on that, like upfront.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. And all right, so I want to make sure that we get a chance to touch on like last kind of couple of things. So does everybody feel like you've got kind of at least like the start of a more sort of customized resume for job searching? Cool. Yeah, so basically like as you're job searching, it's sort of just like rinse and repeat with that. You'll take a look at your job post. You'll take a look at your like master list that you've made and figure out like what things make the most sense to carry over. Generally speaking, there aren't really like, unless you have like awards for something that is relevant, like there's not generally much of anything else that you'll want to like make room for. The one thing that I would like keep in mind as you're putting this together is, so ideally you try to keep it to a page unless you have like a ton of extra experience that is relevant to the specific job that you are posting for or that you're applying for. The other thing is to make sure like there's a lot of freedom as far as structure goes, but just make sure that it's like readable. If design is not your forte, totally fine. I highly recommend like Canva or like built-in templates, not Google Docs templates because they're sad, but like but other templates. Yeah, so there's definitely like ways to do it. Just make sure that like your font is readable and that your margins are not ridiculous, because like that will also make people like will make the hiring manager not want to reach resume. So touching kind of briefly on the cover letter piece, that we're going to just kind of talk about in like broad principles how you want to structure that, because that's the other thing that you're going to use this sort of master list for. So generally speaking, you're going to want to have like usually like 4 paragraphs. So that first paragraph, and this is where like it is so important not to have like a template that you send out. Exactly, at least. Like, so that first paragraph, a lot of times will people write like very generically, like I'm writing to apply to X position that I saw on like Indeed or whatever. And that's fine. Like you want them to know what you're applying for. But after that, you should be kind of talking about like, why should they care? And if you talk about yourself, like that can kind of be a little bit off-putting. I think a lot of people tend to be like, I am such a great candidate for this role. And maybe you are, but you really, really, really want to show that you're like personally invested in that particular job. Even if you're like, even if to you it is like, this is just a job to get me into the industry, like that is not the impression that you want to leave them with. So do a few minutes of research, like find out something about the company that you can like relate to or appreciate. Are they involved in like social initiatives, or are they working on like a technology or a project you're super excited about? Like any of those things are things that you might note in that first paragraph of your cover letter. Like, you know, I saw that you all are working, you know, with this particular framework that I am like super excited to learn. So I wanted to make sure and kind of throw my hat in the ring. Your next two paragraphs are the part where you talk about you. And so like that is where you get to kind of flesh out on what you were trying to convey in the resume. So your first paragraph is generally going to be the like technical skills piece. Use that opportunity to talk about, you know, whether it's education or whether it's, you know, some of you had like these really compelling stories about why you got into tech and like, you know, your kind of first project and like hitting the ground running from there kind of. Talk about those things. Like that enthusiasm is great. And it's a really valuable thing, like when you're looking for your first developer role, to be able to show this is not just something that I like woke up one day and thought like these jobs make a lot of money. I'll do that. Like that's not the impression you want to get. So yeah, so make use of those things. Your next piece is the is generally going to be like soft skills or like other things that they were asking for that are not tools and technologies. And then your last paragraph is generally going to be like, bring it all together. And so you might summarize with, you know, as I mentioned above, I think, you know, both my technical skills and my like previous experience make me a really good fit for this role. Would love to hear from you. Make sure always say thank you. It's like one of those little things that goes such a long way. And then just, you know, kind of close it out politely. And that's basically like what a cover letter should look like. It can be almost a template. So that first paragraph should look different pretty much every time. Your second and third paragraph, generally what I suggest is have like a few narratives in mind that you might want to share. Write them out and then just paste them in. So you don't have to do the work every single time that you're applying for a job, but you also manage to have something that comes across like more genuinely and more interested in that specific role. And then your closing paragraph will usually be like pretty close to the same every time. And that is basically like cover letters. Please feel free to send me one if you want me to take a look afterwards. But I just wanted to make sure and kind of like touch on where that figures in with these. These last couple of minutes, does anybody have any questions? Cool.
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much for your time and your experience and everything that you've done. We really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I really,
Yeah,
really,
thank
really
you.
hope that this was helpful. I was very excited for the opportunity to do this because this is helping folks get into tech is something I'm like very passionate about. So.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, I left my email in the Discord channel. Even if you don't have a resume or cover letter that you want to send, if you have any questions or anything that comes up, like please feel free to reach out anytime. I am also on LinkedIn. So
So you
Um,
recommend updating LinkedIn? I haven't updated my LinkedIn.
Yes. Okay. That I can touch on in the next minute. So use your master list. That's going to give you kind of like a start for LinkedIn. For the most part, that's kind of going to carry over like piece for piece. And then there's a project section. I highly recommend like put something there. Because that's going to give like, especially for like recruiters or people who, if you're like passively job searching, that's going to be people's like first like introduction to you as a developer. And then in that about section, like that's a great place to talk about whatever narrative that you have for like why you got into tech. That's a good place for that. So. And I'm also happy to look at them.
Great. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.